So today I'm going to be talking about BigPipe. It's a frame that I've been working on for the last year or so. A small introduction on who I am. Slide magic work? No, damn. Yes, there we go. So I'm Ferd Eden on Twitter and Ferd-Eden on GitHub, and you can also follow me on Facebook. But let's dive into the framework. So what is BigPipe? What is this thing that I'm going to talk about? It's all based on a blog post that Facebook released like 4 years ago. And they basically rewrote their whole site to make it a bit faster, because back in the old days, Facebook was really slow, big, had like 5 megabytes of JavaScript everywhere. And it was just horrible. So what they did is they completely rewrote everything and changed the way that they serve their components on a page. I don't know if you read the article, but it's basically just slicing up your page into reusable components, and one of the components has been ready for rendering. They flush it out as fast as possible to the browser. And that's basically it. That's the smallest description that I can give of it. The version that we've been building has actually been built by 2 engineers over at Nojitsu, the company that I work for. So it's built by me and my coworker Martijn. And we also basically just assume that you have a layout which is divided in sections that you can reuse. So most sites have a header and a sidebar and some item lists. And all these things are really basically just small components of your site. They have their own CSS, they usually have their own JavaScript functionality and their own HTML. And it's great if we could just bundle those things into like really tiny components and reuse it everywhere that we can. And that's something that we've been doing. And if you, of course, have a lot of pagelets, or if you combine it all, it's just a regular page. The beauty of this is that you're not waiting for the browser to fully render all your HTML. When you send a request to the server, the first thing that it does is respond with a really small basic fragment of HTML, which includes the small library. In this case, it's called bigpipe.js. It also includes a no-script tag, so we could redirect users that doesn't have any JavaScript enabled to an alternate version of the site, because all this async loading of these little components of your site could cause the layout to get all glitchy. So you need to manually recompose the site when all data has been received on the client. So we push that in the header, and we also ship a little small template with some definitions where all these little components need to be loaded. This is done with the data-pagelet attributes on an element with the name of the pagelet that you want to render. So when you finally get one of these components rendered, it sends a small code block to the browser with a data-pagelet fragment with the name of the pagelet that's been loaded. It sets it to display none, so none of these code blocks should be showing up in your browser. All the HTML that's rendered from these little components are wrapped in an HTML comment. This way, the browser doesn't have to be starting to parse this big HTML structure that you have been rendering on the server, and it can just continue with parsing the JavaScript. The reason for this is we really want to get started with loading the JavaScript and the CSS for all these little components as fast as possible. The reason for it is because when you put the HTML in the site, directly when you receive it, the CSS would probably not be loaded, and you get these horrible flashes of unstyled content. So yeah, why would you adopt this pattern? It's really great to optimize your front-end performance for it. You're no longer doing sync requests for style sheets, for JavaScript, or anything else. It's all done asynchronously by the framework. So your front-end will load much faster. You will be using your server resources at the best way possible. Normally, when you're doing requests, you get some data from the database, wait for all the data to be there, and you finally start rendering your HTML. But you could also use that same time to just already render a template from the small bits of data that you already have and send that over to the client. And this all leads to improved perceived performance and time to interact. Because as I said, the generation process where you've been waiting for the data to be rendered in your template will just be reduced to really small sections and eventually just streamed to the server. And of course, the last reason, it's greatly satisfying as a developer to just work in really small components side by side with another teammate without having to worry about that your code will be conflicting with theirs. So I'm going to start diving a bit in the framework itself. So our pagelets are really small, reusable fragments of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. When you require the BigPipe module, there is a pagelet class which you can just extend, just in the same way as you probably are used to when you're using Backbone. I really love this pattern because it's really clear of what you'll be doing. When you have this really small pagelet, the only thing that it really actually requires is to have a get function. This get function is called every time when this pagelet is rendered. So the only thing you need to do there is get some data that you need to render your pagelet. And when it's done, you just call the done callback, and that's it. But it's not only rendering data, it can also receive data. So if you have like a form inside your template and you post it, it will actually be received on the pagelet. So you can just receive, post, boost, anything basically on the server as well. And this makes it really, really nice to build something like a login form, for example, which requires a get and a post to process all the data. One other thing is that the views that you're building inside these pagelets, we support multiple template engines like EJS, Jade, handlebars, basically everything that you're already using. But the biggest thing about it is that these templates are also compatible on the client. So we compile them for server use and client use. So you can just update the client again when you're streaming data, for example, to the client side, and reuse the same layout. In addition to just supporting a regular normal view for the template, we also support a special error template for when these pagelets just fail to load. It can be in a different templating language if you want, but the beauty of this is that you can just show up with a completely related error message for just this single pagelet. In addition to that, we support authorization because there are cases when you probably want to have like an administrator bar on your website. And all these administrator bars should only be visible for a section of your users, for your administrators. And with this authorization function, you can just filter out these elements. And if you supply this constructor with a remove property, it will also remove the placeholder elements from the DOM. So you will keep having a really clean layout at the front end. What we also added is RPC. So you could do some remote procedure calls from the client to the server. It's really simple. The only odd thing that you might be seeing here is that we require that the callback function, the reply function here, is the first argument. The reason for this is that you can supply your RPC function with a variable amount of arguments, and those will just be appended to the end of the function. So you don't have to do any odd argument slicing and figuring out where your callback actually is. As for styling these self-contained widgets, you can use anything you want. You can use stylus, less, SAS, basically everything that you're already using on the front end. The beauty of the things that we're doing here in this BigPipe is that we're namespacing everything. So if you have a pagelet with the class of background, which is of course a really horrible class name, and you set it to red, and another pagelet on the same page is also setting the same class to blue, you won't have any conflicting style sheets styling, because it's all pre-processed by the server and prefixed with the correct correct attribute selectors. But the real beauty of this is these really little components can be distributed over NPM. So we finally have reusable HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in NPM. You can just publish these little pages that you build, and you can just share them, install them again, and reuse them. And if you wish, you can also remix them. So if somebody has been building a login form and you just dislike the styling, the only thing you have to do is install it, extend it again, override the CSS property, and you got the same pagelet but with your own styling. And that's really cool to just be able to reuse other people's modules, other people's layouts, and hopefully this will get you to a more viable product much faster, because everybody could be releasing logging pages and other kind of pagelets into NPM, hopefully. And of course, there's much more that we can do with a single pagelet. But these pagelets are all orchestrated by a really minimal framework that we embed into the site when the page is loading. The JavaScript needs to know that you write when the pagelet has been rendered on the site, so you can register to different events that are emitted from this client. It's globally namespaced as the pipe variable, but it's basically just an event emitter, and you can listen to the render events, initialization events, even the destroy event, so you know when your pagelet has been removed from the page. As we are supporting the multiple placeholders per HTML layout, so you might have a template where you have 2 login forms, and you only need to use one pagelet, but when you re-render HTML, you just want to make sure that those elements are also updated. So we came up with a dedicated render method, which will refresh the HTML for each pagelet. In addition to that, we got a dedicated submit module, which will stream the contents of your form back to the server using the real-time connection that we established for every site for every request, and it will just asynchronously update the HTML and only render the HTML for that specific pagelet that you've been submitting to. So instead of regenerating the whole full page response, you just get this really nice, tiny HTML response, and it will be automatically updated again on your page. As I said before, we have RPC, and those methods are just automatically introduced on the pagelet, and you can just use it to call these server-side methods. And one of the really cool things is that we've been planning to do is sandboxing the JavaScript in these little pagelets, because the last thing that you want is that one framework or one pagelet has been using prototype and has been extending all these horrible built-in functions into your global scope, and another pagelet depends on a specific extended array index of, and those two could be clashing. So we started building a containerization basically for the front end, where all your code will be loaded into a small iframe. So they are somewhat safe, and this has a really nice benefit that when you start removing pagelets again from your site, we can just destroy the iframe and therefore reduce memory of the browser, because you don't have to do any manual cleanup. We just completely kill the iframe, and everything is just really nicely cleaned up. The client is also taking care of all the asset loading. It does asynchronous loading of the CSS and the JavaScript, so it's all completely transparent as a developer. There's nothing you have to do for it. You just create your pagelet and it just runs. In order to get these pagelets onto your site, you have to create a special page instance, which is basically the entry point of each URL. These pages are again exposed on the BigPipe framework, and just like the pagelet, you can extend them in any way that you want. For a page, the only thing that you need to do is add a property called pagelets, where you define the the key of the object as the name of the pagelet and the value as the instance of a pagelet. And the framework takes care of all the bundling of the CSS and JavaScript and stuff like that. But this isn't really maintainable if you have a site full of different small pagelets. So we also support an alternate syntax where you can just load in all the pagelets from a single directory, and they will be introduced as folder name, as the resulting key, and the value, the resulting index file in that folder. All these pages need to be identifiable for the framework, so routing is done by a small path property on the page instance. It's really smart. It supports just string-based URLs, but also regular expression-based routing, and also regex-based routing, which has the ability to use named captured functions or capture statements in your regex, so you can parse that out of the URL again and reuse it in your templates. But all these pages need to have their own base template, which as I've been explaining at one of my previous slides, is that is the first bit of HTML that is streamed to the client, which contains the framework and all the placeholders of the pagelets. So the only thing that you need to do is make sure that you include the bootstrap encoder that we introduce in every template. This includes the JavaScript framework, the meta tags that we add, all the other JavaScript code, CSS that needs to be loaded on the page before we show anything, and of course the no script tag. Just like pagelets, a page need to be able to get authorized. This is also done using the same method, just an authorize function, and you call the next callback with a boolean, just to show if the user is authorized or not to access this page. One of the cool things about BigPipe is that they have different rendering modes for putting the pagelets onto your page. So the default mode is async, and it basically just iterates over all the pages that you've added into a page and renders them as fast as possible and outputs them as fast as possible. But this is unordered rendering. So there are cases that you want to have more control over the rendering process, because you might want to show a header first instead of a footer. For those cases, there's a different mode called pipeline, which renders the pagelets in the order that you specified it in the object. And as last mode, we have a sync mode, which is basically a single flush, which doesn't require any fancy-pancy rendering or JavaScript just to render your site. So this is ideal for robots like the Google, because everybody likes their CEO to be as high as possible. There's much more on a page as well that you can just update, like status codes, methods that it accepts, content types, default template data, parameter parsers, dependencies, char sets, and stuff like that. Now, when you have all these pages, the only thing that we need to do is put them all together, and that's by creating your own and your first BigPipe server. And that is just done by calling the create server method and giving it a property with a page and a dist location. The page's location is usually, or preferred for me, it's a folder where you just have all your page definitions in, and the distribution folder is required because we start compiling every asset of your pagelet into small bundled files, and we need to store them somewhere in disk because we don't want to take too much of the memory of your process. We don't want to have it all buffered in memory. But if you don't like this syntax, you can also just supply it with an array of your page instances. Or if you have your pages in multiple locations, you can just define them using an API. The create server method is completely transparent in a way that you don't really care about what kind of server it needs to create. You can supply it with a port number for 443, and it automatically detects it. It needs to create an HTTPS server. You only need to supply it with the keys and the search for the HTTPS server, and it just runs. There are some cases that you might want to be starting another server that just redirects all your traffic from port 80 to port 443. So we added a redirect option, which just basically does this. It starts up another server on the supplied port and redirects everything to the secure equivalent. In addition to that, we also support Speedy. So if you have a Speedy property, we know you want to create a Speedy server, and we will be using that. As I mentioned before, we are using a real-time connection for every single page that we create, and this real-time connection is done by Primus. You can configure which real-time engine you want to use. So you can use Socket.io, Sock.js, Engine.io, Browser Scope, or just pure WebSockets. And that's pretty awesome. And the reason that we use Primus is it offers really seamless switching for us as a library developer. We can just switch between Engine.io, Sock.js without changing our API or stuff like that. It's only just one line of code that we need to change, and everything just works with every framework that you want. The Primus also adds additional fixes on top of all these libraries to ensure that they are running stable, because out of experience I know that configuring some of these frameworks can be really hard and lead to memory leaks or disconnection and reconnection loops, for example. So it also supports plugins, and these plugins can be used again through BigPipe into Primus, so you can extend the real-time engine of it. It supports custom encoders. It has reconnected actually works, which is really awesome. And it does it in a real working way as well. It uses exponential backoff with a randomized vector, so you won't be DDoSing your server when you update. It has built-in offline detection, and of course it's built with love, because that's all we want, a project that's built with a passion. But what most people don't know is that Primus, this framework, actually started out in BigPipe. It started out as a wrapper around Engine.io because it didn't allow any JSON encoding by default. It just allowed sending strings and binary data. So we started building a wrapper, and I eventually thought, I don't really want to get stuck with Engine.io or just tell everybody, yeah, we're using Engine.io, so just deal with it. So we started doing some refactors, and we came up with this thing called Portal, which basically allowed us to switch everything, every different module in Primus. But the problem was that the name was already taken, so finally we renamed it to Primus and thought, yeah, this is a really cool project. We're going to release it as a standalone project. So the community can also benefit from it, and that's basically what we're doing with every single component that we've been writing for BigPipe. Our containerization for JavaScript, for example, has been released as a separate module. Primus has been released as a separate module. Everything that we can extract out of the core will be just released as a single component, so everybody can just use the technology that we create here in their own applications if they don't want to use the BigPipe system. BigPipe also ships with this compiler. It optimizes the dependencies of all pagelets. It tries to figure out which pagelets are used commonly on every page, assembles that into one single core file, so it doesn't have to be reloading this JavaScript file for all different pages over and over again. It can just be cached in your browser. Same thing it does with CSS. It just makes it it just ensures that everything will be running as intended. One other thing that we allow is really simple status pages. The only thing that you have to do is define a page that responds to 404 requests using the 404 path, or 500 requests using the 500 path, and we automatically just display this page when an error pops up or a URL cannot be found. We also support plugins for extending the BigPipe framework itself. It allows you to extend the server part and the client part in a really transparent way. The client part is automatically added to the BigPipe JavaScript client that's loaded in the head of the page, and the server part just runs on its own. In addition to plugins, we also have support for middleware, because what is a framework without middleware? I mean, there are so many middleware modules, why not just take advantage of that? And all these middleware layers can also be proxied directly into Primus. So if you have a session module, for example, and you need to use the real-time connection as well, you can just enable it for Primus, and it will be automatically appended there. It all just works as intendedly. You can use, disable, remove, enable any middleware as you want. It can be great for development purposes, where you just want to introduce a middleware layer for outputting more debug information, and just enable and disable it on the fly. So I've been talking about this for quite a while now, but I haven't shown anything in action yet. So we're going to attempt to do a live demo of this whole process. And I hope it will work, but I can't see my terminal. That's going to be hard. Yeah, I'm just going to put it back in mirroring. If I can get my mouse back. There we go. So I started, my coworker started building a really cool demo for Empire.js. We thought we could build a site to just display this functionality, but you can use BigPipe for much more than that, than just rendering sites and layouts. We thought we want to render some SVGs, and that's what we're doing here. So I'm going to show you what we built. Just starting up the server and going to localhost. As you can see here, we're loading the JavaScript logo. Really slow, basically, but under the hood, the letter J is a single pagelet, the S is a pagelet, and the background is a pagelet as well. So all these letters have different timeouts, so we can just demonstrate how we're rendering this completely asynchronously without just stopping the responses on the server. So I can basically just add the background pagelet here. Can everybody see this, or is it too dark? Okay. So we have a built-in delay here of 2000 milliseconds. As you can see here, we're extending a base pagelet. So if we go there, we can see. Close this. We can see the get function that basically does a set timeout with the set delay, and just renders the data to the client. It sets the mode to SVG, so we know on the client side how we should be creating these elements that we're streaming to the server. So now if I'm going to increase the delay of the background pagelet to like 10 seconds and restart the server, you'll again see that it's just loading the logo itself really slowly and still waiting for the background. It's still loading, and finally after 10 seconds the background shows up. And that's actually pretty cool, because it's just streaming all this data to your browser without any hard code. That's it. One of the things that we've been doing over at Nojitsu is building applications using BigPipe, and we found out that it's really cool to be able to build these reusable components, and our private NPM is built on top of BigPipe. And we heard a lot of feedback from the community that they liked our our private packages page. So we thought, why not create a public version of this? So we created Browse NPM, which is an open source example of a BigPipe powered site. It's using all the pages that we built for our own private NPM, which will be released as open source as we speak. And it just allows you to search packages in a really nice way. The main page of our Browse NPM site will be showing the different NPM replicas around the world and showing the lag that they have with replication, how fast the response time is, so you can choose your own NPM replica to install modules. It has a search bar, which is also a pagelet. The header that you see here in the screenshot is a pagelet. Everything is just really small components and can be reused on your own site. So if you want to have a private dashboard and just show some package information for your own private packages, you can just reuse these pagelets on your own site. So yeah, check it out. It's online on browsenpm.org. The site is going to be open sourced. All the package pages, all the dependencies, everything is going to be out in the open for everybody to reuse and build their own applications. So the future goals of the BigPipe framework is basically that we want to enable quick lining, or a technique that people might know as turbo links, where you will click on a link and it just loads the page in the background. It's something that we're not doing at the moment, but because we're using little pagelets, we can just completely destroy them and stream another pagelet through the real-time connection to the site and display that. And that should increase the performance of the site a lot. Another couple of things is like page caching, recursive and nested pages, and streaming differable assets, because we want to ensure that these assets that we load on the page are cached for as long as possible, but we still want to make sure that they update in really small diffable versions. And of course, we're going to add more test and benchmarking, but yeah, that's all I got. So if you have any questions about the framework, just tweet me or create GitHub issues on the project. And you can find all the documentation on bigpipe.io, and all the little components, they're all in GitHub and open source. So thanks.